An emperor in exile, dying in a room papered green. 200 years later, we are still asking the same question. Did the wallpaper kill Napoleon?
And in London, in 1861, a 19-year-old girl who made artificial flowers for a living was vomiting green. Her case was no mystery at all.
The suspect in both stories is a color, Scheele's green. A bright, warm, yellowish green, more vivid than any green painters and dyers had before it, and cheaper too. In the 19th century, that combination made it unstoppable. Look closely at the raw pigment, and it almost glows. But this beauty is a compound of copper bonded to arsenic. The color was born in 1775 in the laboratory of Carl Wilhelm Scheele, a Swedish-German chemist experimenting with copper and arsenic. What came out of his work, a copper arsenite, was a green nobody had seen before, brilliant, opaque, and cheap to make. He gave the world a new color. The world put it everywhere. It had flaws. Scheele's green was unstable. Around sulfur-tainted air, it slowly darkened, the brilliance rotting toward black. So, a few decades later, chemists produced a tougher successor, emerald green, another copper arsenic compound, the one the French would call Paris green. Brighter, more stable, and the two greens have been confused ever since. Most surviving arsenic green objects are actually the younger pigment. For this story, what matters is what they shared: arsenic, woven into the most fashionable color of the century. And fashionable it was. Arsenic greens went into wallpaper and house paint, into dresses, calico and window blinds, into candles, children's toys, the covers of books, even artificial flowers for women's hair. By most accounts, it found its way on occasion into sweets. The Victorian home wasn't just decorated with this green, it was saturated in it. Here is what we know now, stated plainly. Scheele's green is extremely toxic, by swallowing, by breathing it in, even by skin contact. And it is a human carcinogen. The Victorians did not know that. They lived inside it. And in green-papered rooms, people were falling ill. As early as 1857, a Birmingham physician named William Hines looked at the green paper on the walls of his own study and suspected it was poisoning him. By the late 1860s, doctors were saying it out loud. The wallpaper was to blame.
But how? The explanation the era settled on was chilling. That in damp rooms, mold growing on the paper released the arsenic into the air itself, a poison gas breathed night after night. In 1893, the Italian scientist Bartolomeo Gossio showed that mold on arsenical paper really does give off an arsenic gas, later identified as trimethylarsine. And for a century, Gossio gas was the accepted killer. Modern chemists doubt it. A 2005 analysis for the Royal Society of Chemistry concluded the gas simply isn't toxic enough and called the wallpaper gas death an urban myth. The arsenic in the walls was real. The sickness was real. Exactly how it did its work, that is still argued.
For some victims, there was nothing uncertain about it. Matilda Shorer was 19 years old, an artificial flower maker in London. Her job was to dust fake leaves with an arsenic green powder, and she worked in that powder all day. In November 1861, she died of arsenic poisoning. The examination found arsenic in her stomach, her liver, and her lungs. Her death was widely publicized, and the public began to look at the fashionable green on flowers, on dresses, on walls, and see a poison. You can still see it. This is Trellis, William Morris's first wallpaper from 1864, now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This design has been documented to contain arsenical green, and Morris knew arsenic well. Part of his family fortune came from arsenic mining. When the health scare grew, he dismissed it at first, but by the 1870s, under public pressure, Morris & Co. was offering arsenic-free papers. To be fair to Morris, not every green paper was poisonous. The Victoria and Albert Museum tested its own Morris samples and found no arsenic at all. Some, not all. That is the honest version. But these patterns show you the world the arsenic greens lived in. Leaves, trellises, pomegranates, room after fashionable room, in exactly the shades everyone wanted. And it wasn't only walls. The same lush greens were printed onto furnishing textiles, the fabric of curtains, cushions, and dresses. The century wrapped itself in green. So, what about the emperor? Here is what is real. Tests on preserved locks of Napoleon's hair did find high levels of arsenic. For a while, that looked like a smoking gun. And by one estimate, the green wallpaper in his rooms carried roughly 0.12 grams of arsenic per square meter, a figure inside the range one 19th century calculation considered hazardous. But the theory unravels. When scientists analyzed hair from across his whole life, the arsenic was high since childhood, decades before the exile, decades before the wallpaper. That points to chronic exposure, a lifetime in a world that was simply full of arsenic. And modern pathology gives an ordinary, unromantic answer for his death: stomach cancer and the bleeding it caused. Historians and scientists still argue the details, but the most likely answer was never the wall. The color's own ending was quieter. As alarms spread through the last decades of the century, Britain moved to regulate arsenic, and manufacturers, reading the public mood, switched to arsenic-free pigments. By the century's end, the poison green was effectively gone from the walls. Gone, but not quite finished. Remember the successor? That brighter, tougher cousin the French called Paris green? It outlived Scheele's original, and it was every bit as arsenical. Where that color went next is a story of its own. The 19th century fell in love with a green. The green moved into every home and every wardrobe, and quietly turned on the people who loved it. A color is never just a color.